on today's StoryBeat.
If you want to write better, write more. If you want to write a lot better, write a lot more. The growth that exists for you in your writing career exists on the page and nowhere else. Yes, you need to make contacts. Yes, you need to ship stuff out. Yes, you need to find an uncle in the business, get lucky breaks, enter contests, move to Los Angeles. But none of it stands in front of words on the page. And if you don't have a strong commitment to the daily active practice of writing, just writing, not even writing well, just writing, you're going to face an uphill climb.
This is StoryBeat with Steve Cuden, a podcast for the creative mind. StoryBeat explores how masters of creativity develop and produce brilliant works that people everywhere love and admire. So join us as we discover how talented creators find success in the worlds of imagination and entertainment. Here now is your host, Steve Cuden.
Thanks for joining us on StoryBeat. We're coming to you from the Steel City, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My guest today, John Vorhaus, is best known for his comedy writing classic, The Comic Toolbox, How to Be Funny Even If You're Not. His writing credits include dozens of teleplays and screenplays, plus 7 novels and numerous books on comedy, writing, creativity, and poker. John has taught and trained writers in 37 countries on 5 continents and created TV shows of his own in Nicaragua, Romania, and elsewhere. His latest book, The Little Book of StandUp, explores his late-blooming interest in stand-up comedy. John's a graduate of Carnegie Mellon University and a member of the Writers Guild of America. For those reasons and many more, I'm so very happy to welcome the prolific writer John Vorhaus to StoryBeat today. John, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Steve. It's great to be here.
Well, it's great to have you. So, all right, let's go back in time a little bit. What were your earliest influences and inspirations? Why did you get into writing and writing comedy in particular? How did that happen? At what age?
As I am a child of the 60s, I was heavily influenced by the comedy groups of the 60s, the well-known Monty Python, but the lesser-known Firesign Theater was a much greater influence on me.
And Phil Proctor's been on this show twice.
Oh, great. That's great. And Pete Bergman wrote the foreword to the Comic Toolbox.
Nice.
So it's a small world and getting smaller all the time. When I was a kid or a teenager, it was almost like a call and response thing. If you were at a party or in class or something and you said a line from Firesign Theater and somebody else gave you the next line, the response to it, you knew right away that was somebody you were going to get along with just fine.
Sure. And so that's where it started. So how old were you at this point? You're a teenager or less?
Oh, a teenager. Yeah, I was a teenager. And even before that, I was listening to comedy albums. My parents turned me on to Alan Sherman. I knew all of those. Hello, Mother. Hello, Father. I knew all of that stuff from a quite an early age. And Tom Lehrer
sure.
was well on my radar. And as I go further back in time, all the way back to a group called the Vaughn Meter was the comic, Meader. The album was called The First Family, and it was a spoof of the Kennedy administration. So I was into that, like on the level of memorizing into it by the age of 8.
And he's legendarily, his career was gone when Kennedy was killed because
because the only thing he could do was his Kennedy impersonation.
He did a great Kennedy impersonation.
Yes, and then he was about to make a comeback with Bobby Kennedy, and oh man,
things did not work
too soon. Too late.
So, at what age did you start to then?
Sorry, I have to. It's rule of 3. And then he tried to make a comeback with Teddy Kennedy, and again, it was oh man.
Well, that particular family would have been tough act to follow any way you cut it, right?
Yeah.
So, at what age did you then think to yourself, I want to write? What caused you to write stuff?
I mean, I was writing in high school, avant-garde plays and short stories and whatnot. And in college, I was writing columns for newspapers, that sort of thing. The turning point came when I had to face myself. about my sophomore year of college, because I was at Brandeis University where I had decided to attend, but they only had 2 writing classes. And by the end of my sophomore year, I'd taken them both. And I really had to look down the barrel of the last 2 years of my college education and say, well, what do you want to do with this? Because I was on a track to become like pre-law, become a lawyer, and that was starting not to make sense. So I applied to transfer and I got into Carnegie Mellon in their creative writing program.
Mhm.
So certainly from the beginning of my junior year of college, I was on the writing track and had in mind that I would pursue it as a career in some sense.
And so you knew somewhere in your teen years that writing was something you thought you were going to pursue.
In my teen years, in my late teen years, certainly. In my earlier teen years, I don't think I had yet reached the point where I had enough agency to say, I'm going to follow my own path and not the path that's laid out for me.
Mhm.
My parents, quite benevolent, lovely, loving people. Nevertheless, they had expectations for me to follow a white collar career path into law, medicine, something, be a professor at a university. So the idea of going off and following my muse, becoming a writer, it's not like they gave me pushback on it once I decided to do it. It just took me a while to come into my own sense of self, to realize that I had the agency, the authority, the personal autonomy to say, this is how I want to chart the course of my life.
Because famously, parents back then, and even to this day, they worry that their children are going to make no money in something
Yes.
like show business or writing or whatever it is.
Mhm.
It's not exactly known for turning out rich people en masse. Some, but very few. Isn't that true?
That is true. When I graduated from college, I became an advertising copywriter. It was my first job out of school. I wasn't quite set free yet, but within a couple of years of that job, I really reached the crux of saying, if I stay in this career long enough to make it meaningful, I'm going to get stuck in it and it's going to be harder to get out. If I bail out now, if I pull the ripcord on the parachute and go indie, become a singer-songwriter, that was what I had my eyes on. I could do it now while I was young and had nothing to lose.
Mhm.
I was single, I didn't have a lot of expenses. So I was very cognizant of the fact that I wasn't likely to make a lot of money at it. And part of my strategic thinking was, I can afford to do it because I don't need to make a lot of money.
Well, when you are young and you
Mhm.
have no money to speak of, it's
Right.
easy to take those risks. It
Mhm.
gets more challenging as time goes on and you've made some money and maybe you have a house and something like that.
Yeah. To quote Bob Dylan, certainly a formidable writer, when you got nothing, you got nothing to lose.
Well, are you going to be doing Bob Dylan all night, I hope?
I certainly can. I'll give you my karaoke, Bob Dylan. My go-to karaoke song for Bob Dylan is Brandy by Looking Glass. Brandy, you're a fine girl. What a good wife you would be.
So,
But to this point, actually, that's a good point, because just after I quit my job and became a singer-songwriter, I also became quite a hustler. And one of the hustles I cooked up was singing telegrams, specifically Dylan-grams. I went to people's houses dressed like Bob Dylan and singing, "Happy birthday to you." And I got away with it. I mean, I was shameless in what I would purport to be able to do as a performer.
but that's what it takes, doesn't it? To be
Yes.
shameless about it?
Yes, you do need to be shameless. And a lot of it has to do with looking your ego square in the eye and saying, this isn't about, am I good enough to be worthy to have permission awarded to me? But rather, is this my path? Is this where my passion and my purpose intersect? If this is the path that I must be on, then I never need to worry about being shameless or being thought shameless. Because in service of my urgent need to be creatively aspirational, screw it. I'll do anything I have to do. I'll lie. I'll pretend I know how to do things I don't know how to do. I'll teach things I don't know how to do, because I need to subsidize this urgent journey that I'm on until the urgent journey itself monetizes itself, if it ever does.
And this was both intellectual, as in writing, and performative, as in you were doing some kind of acting or something like that.
Yeah, I had discovered that the shortest distance between the thoughts in my brain and impact on other people's brains, like getting my thoughts from my head to their head, was direct performance. Standing in front of an audience, talking to them, or singing and playing guitar, singing a song, sharing my thoughts and my words. But I also discovered that if I was not afraid to be in front of people, that was a skill that I could use in a lot of different directions. In those early years, I would do things like I'd go to a college and I would do a strolling concert at lunchtime in the cafeteria, just me and my guitar. I'd do a songwriting workshop for invited students in the afternoon, and then a coffee house performance in the evening. And if I could offer all of these different things to the buyer, that made it much more sensible for them to pay me the small, a few $100s that I was asking, whatever, to drive from where I was to where they were and deliver the goods.
And so you, at that time, you thought of yourself more as a singer-songwriter than a writer of books or comedy.
Very, very much so. And for reasons that will become clear when I say that, as you know, the writing experience is fraught with fear. And every time we try to perform at a higher level, do something bigger than we've done before, there's a corresponding higher level of fear.
Mm-hmm.
When I came out of college, I could handle the fear of advertising copywriting. It was all I could manage. Then I got a little bit bolder and more skilled, and I said, okay, I can handle the fear level of being a singer-songwriter. And I did that for 5 years until I discovered there were two things that frankly I couldn't do particularly well: sing and play guitar. And so it was time to lay down those tools and face the greater fear of transitioning, in that case, into situation comedy. I thought, okay, I've written some songs, I've written some short stories. Maybe I can find my way to write this thing called a sitcom.
Because comedy doesn't require any fear at all.
Well, that's the thing is, I was always funny. I've been landing jokes since like even before I could talk, probably.
Were you a class clown?
I was a class clown, but more than that, I just have a bent perspective. I look at things differently from the way normal people look at them. Also, less a class clown than the family clown. Youngest of three, with an older brother and an older sister, were fairly straightforward individuals. I got a lot of validation for being funny. The line they used to use, I'm 66 now, and for 65 years, I thought this was a compliment. Don't laugh at him, it just eggs him on. But in the last year, I realized it's not a compliment, it was a warning.
And you were natural at it. You just were gifted at saying things, twisting words, phrases, looking at situations and finding the funny in them. You were natural at it. You didn't even have to work all that hard at it, right?
No, but I at a certain point, I realized I could apply toolcraft to it. And that was a big breakthrough for me, because I have the natural funny. I have natural creative gifts, but I also have a teacher's analytical sense. And so, for example, I was teaching songwriting almost from the first minute I started doing it, because I knew that if I wanted to learn how to do it, I would be challenged to teach it. If I could teach it effectively, if I could learn it effectively, I could teach it effectively, and that would improve the learning, whatnot. But the two parts of the process were, I'll come up with something by magic, the magical creativity that we all know so well. But then I'll go back and look at it and I'll ask myself, what are the magic parts here? Why does this work the way it works? What principles can I extract from this? And how can I apply those principles to other songs or jokes or skits or sitcom, whatever I'm writing? And that really went a long way toward leveling me up in terms of what I was capable of doing.
Well, notoriously, obviously, that many teachers, and I'm going to guess you're going to say the same thing. I know I taught screenwriting here in Pittsburgh for the last 10 years, and you learn as much or more than the students learn from you, just because you're starting to see things from a different perspective, other people's perspective as they learn.
And my career has that sort of in spades, because most of the teaching and training that I've done has been in other countries. And so every time I'm in a teaching environment overseas, I'm immersed in a culture I don't know, dealing with people whose educations are different from mine, whose apprehension of English is different from mine, whose background, whose sense of humor is all different. So profound learning experience. I once described my business model this way: I travel around the world exchanging information for experience and money.
That's pretty cool. If you can make a living doing that and enjoy it, and if you can enjoy it, obviously, that's a really great thing.
But there's an interesting emotional block that stands in the middle of it. I'm sure you've heard this or you've thought it. Those who can't do teach. Have you heard this expression?
Oh, yes, and sure.
That was a huge burden to me at a critical moment in my life because I was struggling in Hollywood. I didn't feel like I was getting where I wanted to with my writing career. I didn't think I was very good at it, but the teaching I was great at. I loved it. I was effective. People were getting tremendous value out of it. But those who can't do teach. I'm leading myself down a blind alley if I give too much attention to this. And one of my students liberated me from it with a simple question: how about those who can do both? And the schizophrenic in me, the one who is both creative and analytical, said, that's my path. If I can write all the time and teach all the time, the writing will help the teaching will help the writing, and my life will stay in the balance that my life needs. So
I think that's a pretty phenomenal take on how you can go through life by learning and teaching at the same time.
Not all can, but many more can than will admit, because just too many of us get stuck at those who can't do teach.
The old line is, dying is easy, comedy is hard. You probably have a really good perspective on this. What makes writing not just comedy, but effective, good, funny comedy? What makes it hard to do and do well?
Yeah, well, that's a great question, class. I think the one thing that stands paramount, the big block, makes it hard to do well, is the willingness to admit it's not working yet. A lot of people who try to write comedy, they write something like a joke. They kind of know that the joke doesn't work, but they're not willing to let it go in search of something better. Their fear blocks them. If I let this joke go, will I find a better joke to replace it? So fearlessness is top of mind in terms of what makes writing comedy work, especially if you're writing collaboratively. You're in a room full of other joke writers. It's a shark pit or a shark cage or snake pit. It's a snake pit full of sharks.
There you go.
With a ring of alligators around it.
And so, it smells like hell.
Yeah, and it's not about having a thick skin. It's about knowing what your ego is intended to do. And what your ego is intended to do is make the work as good as possible, not feel good about itself per se. So if you tell me a joke and I want to fix your joke, it's not funny, it's not working, and I say to you, on a technological level, on the level of the joke technology, it's not working because there's not enough distance between real reality and the exaggerated comic reality that you're proposing. We need a greater sense of exaggeration. We just need to spread things apart more. That's an actionable note, but if it doesn't get past, that guy doesn't like my joke, I suck, then the possibility to improve isn't there. So there are the tools that are associated with comedy. Use exaggeration, use clash of context, use inappropriate response, use taboo, and on and on. There are tools that you can learn and master, but they need to be informed by a perspective that says, my job is to get to the best version of this material I can. My job is not to protect my ego along the way. And once you're there, then you can absorb, learn the tools, learn how they work, and then use them effectively because you are unafraid. So I would say that's the package.
We talked about fear a moment ago. How fearful is it for a lot of writers to go into a writer's room with a bunch of, as you say, snakes in a pit, and they're all joke tellers and they're all comedy writers and they're all trying to get the attention in the room and have their jokes land? How much fear must you overcome to be good at that?
Well, all of it, and there's a considerable amount. There's a wonderful expression, I don't know exactly where it comes from, but each of us is the center of our own universe, and we're of astoundingly little interest to the universe next door. And this awareness is what helps us in those rooms, because we go into a writer's room and we're thinking, all eyes are on me, everybody hates me. But if we just had other awareness, we'd look around the room and we'd realize that guy over there, he's thinking, all eyes are on me, everybody hates me. And that guy over there, he's thinking, all eyes are on me, everybody hates me. And that woman over there, she's thinking, all eyes are on me, everybody hates me. Plus, I'm a woman in a room full of men. This completely sucks. Everybody is informed by the same matrix of fear. It's not like people don't have fear. They just either know they have it or they don't know they have it, and they operate on it effectively. I wish I had known that at the time. Because as a young, scared writer in sitcom writing rooms, I really, really underperformed. I was too self-conscious, too unself-aware to make the most of the opportunity that I had before me. That's just a frank appraisal of things.
Do you think that many writers who are not good at that sort of outward thing where they have to actually say things out loud as opposed to just writing them down, do you think that that wrecks certain careers that could otherwise be great?
On writing staffs, there are different strengths. It's like a baseball lineup. You might have writers on the staff who are just good at story, or the kind of writer you're talking about. They're better off, you give them an assignment, send them off in a quiet place where the brain can work on it and they'll come up with it. But these guys over here, they're good at pitching jokes and they don't mind sitting around telling 10 jokes, knowing that 9 won't work. They're in their element and they're not afraid. So different writers have different strengths, but a writer who wants a career as a writer needs a full complement of strengths across as broad a variety of fronts as possible. One of the things that I had going for me early on, because I had this ability to analyze and deconstruct, I could write comedy, I could write hour drama, I could write horror thriller, because it was all creative problem solving to me. It wasn't like comedy wasn't different in my mind from horror. It was just, what are the tools? How do I apply them? What do they do? What's the result?
Right. Do you think anyone can become a comedy writer if they try hard enough at it, or is it baked in the DNA?
If they try hard enough at addressing the fear. I keep coming back to fear. Let me maybe try a different word. And this is going to sound strange. Self-awareness. If anyone who's willing to invest in his or her or their raw self-awareness, get to the bottom of who they are as a person and be fearless and accepting of who they are, they can be funny. Because comedy is truth and pain, and I know it because I wrote it. It's like the controlling idea of the Comic Toolbox. Every single moment that we think of as funny is informed by an underlying truth and pain. And a comic's job is to identify the truth and pain of his or her own experience, turn it into a joke. I'll give you an example. This just came up today. I was preparing for a meeting. I gotta make sure I get this right. So I'm preparing for a meeting on a screenplay that I just wrote. I'm getting my first set of notes.
Right.
And notes are, the fantasy version is they're going to open up the Zoom meeting saying, we love every word you wrote. Thank you. We'd like to send you more money. We won't bother you anymore.
Yeah, that.
And end the meeting. And I know that's not what's going to happen. They're going to have notes. They're going to have problems. They might be big problems. And you might end up feeling like, wow, they don't really like me at all. And this work that I thought was good, maybe it's not that good after all. So I'm going into this meeting. They said, we've got the Zoom set up. You ready to go? And I wrote back and I said, as the deer said to the hunter, I'm game.
That's good.
That's not bad. It's not bad for a joke that like fell in my lap at this advanced stage. But the underlying truth and pain is I'm a writer about to go into into a note meeting. That's the truth. And I will probably I'll probably suffer under the withering criticism, or what I perceive as the withering criticism of my creative partners, in this case, the producers. And the truth and pain is, even though I should know better, I'm still going into this moment with a whole lot of fear. And I suppose if you ask me in my process, I would say I was probably thinking I'm like a deer in headlights. And then the part of my brain that plays with words started thinking about, well, what is a deer? A deer is game. Oh, game. Oh, I'm game. I'm ready to go. I'm game. I'm ready to be killed. Once you put those two things side by side, that's where the joke takes place. But it only takes place because I'm willing to self-confront and say, this is what I'm afraid of.
That's the human element of taking 1 + 1 and making 3.
Yes, exactly.
And that, I'm not sure that I actually hope they never get computers to the point where 1 + 1 = 3 to a computer, that a computer has to still go through that straightforward process, even at high speed. You think that, well, I'm curious about notes. I ask lots of writers about notes. What is your philosophy toward taking notes? How do you look at it? How do you look at that process?
That's a great question. And I was reminding myself of I wouldn't say my philosophy, but my practice of taking notes this very day.
Mm-hmm.
I try to do two things. Don't argue, don't explain.
Mm-hmm.
When I'm taking notes, I'm taking notes. I'm not necessarily agreeing with the notes. I might be stifling an urge to fight back against the note.
Sure.
But the job of that meeting is for the producer, the note giver, to communicate their notes to me. The question of whether the notes are right or valid is for later. The question of how I will incorporate those notes and make them work, that's for later. The question of whether I want to, plant an incendiary device in the producer's car, that's for later. And by the way, ladies and gentlemen, that's called the rule of three, a standard comedy writing tool. The first thing I told you was this thing here, that's for later, and it's serious and it means business. Second thing I told you, this is also for later, also serious and means business. But this third thing cuts across that expectation that I just set up for you and gives you something that is saved for later, but is not serious business and to be taken seriously. That's what makes that joke work.
Philosophically, I have taught students for quite some time that you just do exactly what you just said, which is take the notes, even if you disagree with them, even if you think the person giving you the notes a complete idiot, it doesn't matter. Take the notes. Have you had the experience of taking a lousy, or what you thought was a lousy, irrelevant, not very well thought through note, and later somehow that note then triggered a different thought that was actually an improvement to your work?
Sure. Story writers speak of story problems, and script story writers in particular are confronted with story problems. This thing here doesn't work. You need to fix it.
Mm-hmm.
My experience is when confronted with a story problem, this will sound cliche and kind of Pollyanna, I'm really being confronted with a story opportunity. The story problem is a hill I have to climb or a wall I have to get over. And if I succeed in resolving this note, if I succeed in making the story problem go away, the work will improve and I will have achieved my goal. So I'm very much I'm very much in accord with the idea that a note you might hate in the meeting is the note that unlocks everything later on.
Mm-hmm.
I want to give you a quote, and I want to attribute it because I promised him I always would. A collaborator, a colleague of mine from Switzerland, of all places, a writer named Charles Lewinsky, television writer, he once said the following. He said, when a producer tells you what's wrong, he's almost always right. When he tells you how to fix it, he's almost always wrong.
Well, that's a great quote.
Yeah. And for our purposes, it's like the note giver might not know what the problem really is. The note giver might tell you, this room feels too blue. And you're thinking to yourself, what does that even mean? The room is too blue. I mean, I use the word blue in the description, but what does that really mean? What the producer is really trying to convey is, it feels downbeat. I'm sad. I don't want to be sad. I'd rather be uplifted here. Again, the person giving the notes might not know exactly what's wrong. Maybe the best they can do is tell you that something feels wrong,
Mm-hmm.
even if they can't tell you what it is or how to fix it. I've been on both sides of it. I've been a network development executive and a production company development executive many, many times. And a teacher and a head writer. I've given many more notes than I've taken, I would say,
Right.
in the course of my career. So I know that whole world, and I know that a lot of people give notes who are not particularly good at giving notes. It's just that their job requires them to give notes.
Sure.
I asked a more experienced colleague of mine once, I said, these notes from the network don't seem to make much sense. Doesn't anybody over there know how to read a story? And he said, you think they got their jobs by being good at story. They got their jobs by being good at networking. And they got their jobs by being good at organizational politics.
Mm-hmm.
And that's always...
and maybe administration.
And maybe administration. That's always stuck with me. If I'm charitable, and I try to be charitable, if I have generosity of spirit toward the people who are giving me notes, I might say to myself, their notes are well-intentioned. They're just not skillful enough to give me the notes in a way that is immediately meaningful to me.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, I'm going to take notes like crazy, write down everything they say, and try to figure it out later.
I think that that's exceptionally right on the money. And so many writers, and you know what I'm talking about, so many writers just get ticked off in a room and say the wrong thing, and the next thing they know, they're not working for that person anymore.
That's because they're filtering information through ego.
Mhm.
I wish we look. Maybe if your listeners will indulge me, we can all take a look at this virtual whiteboard that I'm drawing on right now. And at the top of the whiteboard, it says we see the word information, and at the bottom of the whiteboard, we see the word outcome. But on the left side of the whiteboard, we see the word process. And on the other side of the whiteboard, we see the word ego. And we recognize that information will be filtered either through process or through ego. And if the information is filtered through ego, then the ego says, this information makes me feel bad. This information is hurting me. And when a writer does that in a room, filters through ego in the room, that's when they blow up. Because I'm hurting so bad, I have to fight back. You're an idiot. You don't know what you're talking about. That's pure defensive ego. If I make a choice instead not to filter through ego, but filter through process, and ask the question, how can I use this information to improve the work? Then that information goes smoothly from input to outcome. I'm getting the note, I'm filtering through process, I'm using what's useful, and I'm improving the work. Here's the benefit, here's the good news. If I succeed in this, if I improve the work, how does my ego feel? Much better, right?
For sure.
So if I serve the ego in the meeting and I blow up, then the work doesn't improve and my ego never gets to feel good. If I ignore the ego in the meeting and just focus on process, taking on the information and using it effectively, then the work improves. I feel better as a writer, and then my ego is rewarded. And so all of this boils down to the following simple one-liner: save your ego for the award ceremony.
And by the way, there's a secondary benefit to what you're talking about, which is if you've incorporated in some way, even in some minor way, a note that you got from an executive or a producer or whoever, they then think that they've participated in the process and they feel better about what you're doing.
And if you peel back the layer, you realize they're filtering through ego. They're reading that draft looking for validation of their contribution. And so in that sense, if I drop that Easter egg into the script, if I give them the elephant joke they really, really wanted, then I'm not costing myself anything. I'm demonstrating generosity of spirit, but I'm also manipulating that individual on a deep and profound level. And that's where I live.
So let's talk about the biggest notes you're going to get ever. It's when, because you've written a book about stand-up comics. Are you doing stand-up these days?
I'm in and out of it because of COVID. I just can't bring myself to be in clubs even now.
Right.
And the Zoom experience was a good place to start, but it's not where I want to be.
Right. So, all right. So the biggest notes you're going to get as a comedy writer, if you want to call it that, is when the audience tells you the joke works and it doesn't work. They're going to tell you.
Yes.
So that's ego, and that's fear as well.
Sure.
It's all built part and parcel sort of the same thing. What would you say are the biggest challenges for a stand-up comic who, after all, is writing comedy like a writer in a room, but then
and also performing it?
What are the biggest challenges for a stand-up comedian to overcome and deal with in their career?
Oh, wow. That's just such a long list. I mean, just getting up on stage, getting over that 8-inch riser from the floor to the stage for the first time. That's a hurdle that some writers, comics never get over. I mean, within the sound of our voices right now, there's probably a fair number of, we could call them pre-stand-up comics, people who want to go up, they just haven't gotten up yet because they're too afraid. They haven't gotten over the fear hurdle that will get them up onto the stage. To those people, I would say, throw it out the window and see if it lands. It'll probably go very badly, but if you set your expectations properly, it won't hurt. Your expectation of your first going up, your first stand-up experience, is not to kill. It's not even to succeed. It's to have fun and experience the moment. So if you say to yourself, this is probably going to be disaster, my expectation is that I'm going to come off stage wanting to kill myself, that the conscious lowering of expectation will actually help you get up on stage. You'll find out it's not true. You won't come off stage wanting to kill yourself. You'll come off stage high as a kite and wanting to get back on stage right away again, even if only one joke out of 100 worked. Because that one joke was so potent the drug of audience laughter is so addictive. You get a taste of it, you want more. And this actually goes to something that's deeper and worth looking at for those of you who are thinking, is my future in comic writing or comic performing? I know very well how it feels to be a performer, successful performer, failed performer. It's a drug of a certain kind. And I just want to say, for me, it's not the best drug. It's not, it's kind of low grade to me. It's stimulating, you get a strong ego buzz out of it, but it doesn't carry the same weight as going to war with the words on the page and really sweating your thoughts and your heart out onto the page and getting into the creative zone where the buzz is the buzz of creativity, not the buzz of audience approval.
Mhm.
All right, I think I've gotten to it better now. The difference between a writing comic and a stand-up comic is hooked on audience approval, or at least aware of, draws benefit from audience approval. If audience approval is something you don't need or can't stand, then stand-up comedy is really not for you. You can still write because your buzz, the buzz you're chasing, is the buzz of creative expression. And you go further down that spectrum and you find artists who create art that never sees the light of day, because for them, the buzz is just the act of creation itself. So these are things to think about. To succeed in stand-up comedy, back to your question, a willingness and an ability to be part of community is very important. You need to be a comic among other comics, because that's where your growth takes place. All of you learning together, working your craft together, exchanging ideas, suffering together, sometimes banding together to get a little bit more money from the clubs. It's very, very hard to be a stand-up comic within emotional isolation. And this is part of the problem that I have as an older person going into stand-up comedy, because my peers could be my grandchildren, and their community is alien to me, and my frames of reference are alien to them. So it's that much harder for me to build a place for community for myself in that realm. Obviously, my place is clear. I teach to that community. In one of my stand-up comedy routines, I point out, I haven't performed very much, and that's just as well, because at this point, nobody really knows how bad I am. And the more I perform, the lower my stock will fall, one might say. In fact, I think I'm better off not performing at all. Then I could be like this mysterious stand-up comic that nobody has ever seen, like the J.D. Salinger of stand-up comedy. And for someone who's teaching stand-up comedy, that's a position of authority, much better than being out there among the people bombing alongside everybody else.
So how different is the construction of a stand-up comic's joke or routine to writing dialogue in a comedy script?
That is a question that I can answer because I had a breakthrough on it. When I was first getting into stand-up comedy, the thing that vexed me was memorizing my material, because I don't have a good memory at this stage of my life. I lost my memory along with my virginity, my sanity, and my hearing at a Grateful Dead concert in the Boston Garden in 1979. At least that's what I tell people. But between you and me, it was Emerson, Lake and Palmer, 1973, brain salad surgery.
Guess what? Me too.
You too, of course. Of course. Anyway, the point is, I would sit at my computer and write funny stuff and then read it and try to memorize it and speak it. And it just didn't work. I ended up with something that sounded very performative and forced. But I walk every day. I got a dog, I walk a dog. Even without a dog during the pandemic, I walk. And so one day I said to myself, I'm going to print out what I think my act is and stick it in my back pocket. And then I'm just going to go out walking. I'm not going to look at it unless I need to jog my memory about something. But I'm just going to try and develop this act as a spoken thing. You know, I'll try and come up with the first line and I'll say it. And if I like it, I'll say it again and then try to add a second line and so on. And then I'll take off on a run or somewhere and I'll think something funny and I'll try to remember it and I'll go back and start over. But this whole process of learning the act by talking it rather than learning the act by writing it describes the difference that you're talking about, at least for this creator. And it's a strategy that I think really, really works. I tell people, if you want to learn your act, and perform it so that it doesn't sound memorized and performed. Walk with it until you get it. So
I believe in walking to work through story and character and all the rest of it. I think walking is a really phenomenal way to sort of get into a rhythm on things.
And I have had very little success walking story. All my life, I've said to myself, I'm out walking the dogs. I should work on my story problems. And I can't focus on them. Story, I have to be looking at the words on the page to be inside the story.
Huh.
But look, we've all got different modalities with different way of thinking. And this goes back to something I said earlier. There's always two things happening. There's your creative process and there's your examination of the creative process. And both are necessary. You can't just create and not reflect on how you create.
Mm-hmm.
The more you reflect on how you create, the better your systems and your processes, your tricks become. And the cleverer you get at solving recurring problems. I'm trying to give you an example. I get stuck in a scene. I'm trying to fix 3 lines of dialogue and they won't fix. Everything else seems to be working, but these 3 lines don't work. I have a trick. Blow up the scene. Pretend it's not allowed. Find a whole other way in. Even if 75% of it is working and you can't get the last 25% built on this platform, blow up the platform, build a new platform. So that's just in the storehouse of strategies that I've accumulated over the years, written down because I'm a writer, but still useful, in my brain. This is what I do. Every time I do something, I ask myself, how'd you do it? What did you learn from that? And how can you take what you've learned to do it better next time?
That's very good. I mean, I think a lot of writers try not to think about that stuff, and yet they should. They don't want to know how it works. I've talked to any number of writers who have said they don't want to know how they actually do what they do. And I think that that's how you learn more about how you do it better and better. That's just me. Anytime
a writer tells me something like that, it's like a neon sign flashing in my brain. That's fear. That's fear. That's fear. You don't want to know your process. It's not that you don't want to know your process. If somebody came along and said to you, I've been analyzing your process. Here it is. Would you like to look at it? That'd be great. You don't want to know your process because you don't want to do the work of discovering your process. And by work, I don't mean analytical work. I mean soul work, looking inside yourself and figuring out what makes you tick.
So, all right, I asked this question of lots of guests of all kinds. What in your world makes a good story good?
Pole to pole. Change of state from denial to acceptance of the theme. Characters enters a story thinking this thing here is the truth. And at the end of the story realizes that thing that I thought was the truth is not the truth. I am transformed. An authentic story of transformation is a story that works for me. Most of those stories are happy ending stories, and most comedies are transformation stories, with the exception of what we call black comedies. An example that comes to mind as a non-transformation story is War of the Roses, where the characters, it's notionally funny, but it's dark humor, but they crash and burn and they never learn and they never transcend. But you look at something like Big, which is one of my favorite movies. Kid wants to be grown up, then he's a grown up and he realizes I was wrong to want to be a grown up. I got to be a kid while I am a kid. And that is a soul satisfying message for me as a viewer and for audiences. So that's what I'm looking for.
Famously, Seinfeld, Larry David's mantra was no hugging, no growth,
no lessons, no learning, whatever.
Right, no learning, exactly.
Okay, so and then if you're watching Seinfeld, you have an expectation. Nobody's going to try and learn. Nobody's going to try and teach. I'm on board. But every creative package does that. It says to the reader or the viewer, these are the expectations we want you to have going in. And if you have these expectations, we're going to try to fulfill them. Here's an example. We know the series Stranger Things. We know from the title, the expectation is Stranger Things. And when we don't get Stranger Things, we're going to be disappointed.
Right.
And there are a lot of shows like that promise to be strange and stop being strange or become too strange, and then they lose their audience.
Because they can't keep the act up. It's too much.
Exactly. But Seinfeld, the promise that it makes to the reader, to the viewer, this is never going to be redemptive. These characters are never going to learn and be saved. Even in the final episode, they don't learn and they're not saved. But that's the promise of the show. On the other hand, side by side with that, we have Friends, which is very touchy-feely and very lesson-driven. And other sitcoms are elsewhere on that spectrum.
Sure.
Which leads to this point. As the sage says, the ocean is blue, but it's also wet. There's always more than one right answer.
Mhm.
So people say a sitcom, for example, should be lessons learned like Friends, or somebody says a sitcom should be realistic like The Office. Neither of those people is correct. The sitcom shouldn't be one thing or another. It should be exactly what it is. Make that promise to the audience and see if the audience finds their way to it.
But ultimately, it better be funny.
Ultimately, it better be funny. It's hard to make a sitcom be successful without it being funny, although there are plenty of examples of shows that you and I would look at and get through from beginning to end and not get a single laugh. But if I may illustrate this point, I was trying to make this point to a class one time, and I think I got it. They were Seinfeld fans, and they wanted to make a sitcom just like Seinfeld. And I said, you love Seinfeld because you understand Seinfeld. You can't be sure that your audience has your same frame of reference. I said, there's a show that I watch all the time just to try to figure it out, but it confounds me. I don't understand the characters. I don't understand the world. I don't understand the production scheme. I don't even understand the language they're using. Try as I might, I cannot figure out the Teletubbies.
You know what? I wrote a lot of children's animation scripts, and sometimes there were shows that I was asked to write that I couldn't understand, so I just didn't write them.
Mm-hmm. So, but you can say, I'm not the audience. The material doesn't have to work for me because I'm not the audience for that show, which is the point.
One of the things that has happened for me, and maybe it's happened for you or not, is that over time, I grew up, I was a big time sitcom fan and loved every sitcom that was on TV. And I just thought I just laughed out loud at many of them. And over time, they became kind of blanded out to me, and I found them less and less funny, especially the network sitcoms. And then I was habituated to that kind of comedy, and I then needed something a little more, I guess, tough, like Curb Your Enthusiasm or Veep. I needed something that had a little more edge to it. I hate that word, but that's what it was. It had a little bit more of a rawness to it.
You are reflecting every culture's experience of sitcom, and I know about this because I've grown through cultural change in many countries. Country starts out not knowing how to watch a sitcom. The audience doesn't know how to watch a sitcom. And if you give them something too complex, they're not going to like it. You give them something nice and simple, a straightforward family sitcom, for example, let them get used to the idiom. Then once they know how a sitcom sounds, what its rhythms and rewards are, then the next time you reach out to them, you can give them something different, something slightly more challenging, maybe an office comedy or young adults, something like that. The more sophisticated they become, the greater demand they have for more sophisticated material, and the more you adapt and meet the demand for more sophisticated material. So that's all you're saying. You're exposed to material, you become habituated to it, you need more. Television is a drug.
For sure it is. It really it sucks people down that rabbit hole, and you get stuck down there. Yeah. All right. So I need, before we get too far into this conversation, I really need to understand how you then get all the way over to poker. How did that happen? How have you become a poker expert to the point where you've written about it?
I'll try and give you the story in as concise a manner as possible. The year is 1988, and the Writers Guild of America is on strike.
Yes.
So I can't work as a writer. I'm a member of the guild. I'm not going to cross the picket line. Got time on my hands and loose money to spend. I find my way into a card room in Southern California, poker room. And I put down my $20 into a game of 7-card stud, and they went through me like a freight train through the wind.
Had you played a lot of poker prior to that?
I played home poker before. I'd never played casino poker, maybe once or twice. I'd been in a card room.
You understood the game.
I understood the game,
yeah,
right?
Okay.
I understood the game, but I didn't understand the game as an avocation, a hobby, a profession, any of that. Anyway, I got crushed, and I said to myself, like I say to myself, this is fun. I want to learn how to do it. Maybe I can find someone to pay me to teach it. And I reached out to a card magazine and I said, I don't know anything at all about poker, but I'm going to learn. And while I learn, I want to write about it. And they said, that sounds like a good idea, which just goes to show that tremendous flaws in judgment are not limited to me. Other people can make them as well.
Uh-huh.
But so I had been writing about poker just, for $300 every other week, write a column, put it in a magazine for almost a dozen years when poker got hot around the turn of the century.
Right.
And when it got hot, you'll remember around 2000, 2003, the moneymaker effect.
Chris
Parentheses,
Moneymaker.
that was driven by the technological advancements of the whole cam, so you could see the player's cards, and internet poker. So when you got all hot and bothered watching poker, you could go play poker. It was a beautiful thing, but it was not sustainable because it's going to cost a lot of people the wrong kind of money. We could go down that rabbit hole. The point is, I went to my agent at the time and I said, looks like poker's really taken off here. I think I could sell a book about poker in this market. And he said, and I'll never forget, it changed my life. He said, I don't think I can sell a book, but I know I can sell 3. And I said, what do you mean? I said, what do you mean? He said, I got a buyer for a poker book series. I can't sell an individual book, but I can sell a series right away. I said, well, I don't have 3 books worth of poker in me. And he said, sure you do. You'll find it. And he was right. I am a hardworking writer. And if somebody's offering me a significant chunk of change to write 60,000 words on poker, new words on poker every 6 months for the next 18 months, I am down like a clown, Charlie Brown. I will become an expert in poker. I love poker to begin with, so that helps. But there's learning to be done and there's teaching to be done. And that's where I live. Those years, I wrote the 3. They bought another 3. Now I'm really scratching my head, but somehow I got through the second 3 and actually used the last one in this series to transition into novel writing, into fiction writing, because my last in the series was a poker novel, a how-to whodunit, a combination murder mystery teaching tool called Under the Gun. Hard to find, but you should look for it because it's great. The point is, in those years, when I was turning out a couple full-length manuscripts a year, that's when I really learned what it means to be a day in and day out, pants, butt in the chair kind of writer, because I had deadlines and I had to meet them. I had content, I needed to generate it. And by the time I was done with it, I was ready for the next stage of my career, which was writing long-form fiction, writing novels.
And you were no longer writing in a room with a bunch of other people. It was just you.
And I was right. And I think that was a big thing. That's kind of why I left television as my primary focus. I really wanted to be in charge of the whole thing. I wanted to do it. And in fact, if you look at my body of work now, my latest books, independently published, written by me, edited by me, cover design by me, cover art by me, promotion by me, marketing by me, Facebook, social media by me. I'm a cottage industry by choice. That's the way I want it. I want to control all aspects of this thing that I'm creating.
And do you feel fulfilled by that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Even with books that haven't sold. And I've written a lot of books that just haven't sold. I don't know. I mean, it's just in the way of things.
Most writers that write books have written a lot
of books that haven't sold.
Not everyone is Stephen King,
But I have written the Comic Toolbox. And here's what I know about the Comic Toolbox. I wrote it a quarter of a century ago. It's doing as well now as it did then.
Wow, nice.
It's impacting people as much now as it did then. And that's 25 years on. And what I can extract from this, and this is the important part, 25 years from now, it's likely it'll still be doing that job, but I might be dead, which means I have something that not too many people have, which is the certainty of my creative output living beyond me in some sense. The way I consider it is the Comic Toolbox is my carrier wave. It's taking the ideas of John Vorhaus into the future. Mm-hmm. For sure, it's established. We're transmitting on that we're beaming into the future along the carrier wave, the frequency that's called the Comic Toolbox. Whatever else I do to try and piggyback on that, the jury's still out on what others of my stuff will have this element of legacy to them. But from that point of view, I can look at my body of work and say, it's a solved problem. I don't need to prove to myself that I can be successful as a writer. The success of my capability and my outcome is present to me, is visible to my eyes. That's why I can say I am completely content with books that don't sell.
Well, the greatest time traveling device that we know of as of today are books.
Mhm.
Because you can read something that was written 3,000 years ago, and that writer is speaking to you from across time.
Mhm. But I still contend that if you want to make it really last, you have to carve it in stone.
Very heavy to carry around.
Super heavy to carry around. The Kindle's much lighter, but a lot less permanent.
That's true. That's absolutely true.
I mean, just think about it. You can have 1,000 books, 100,000 books on your Kindle, but if you don't have a power cord, you don't have anything.
Oh, I think about that all the time because I
All the
read on
time.
the Kindle and I think, well, you know, if somebody actually does something to take our power away,
Right.
you're screwed. And now you got to go find paper books again because those still can be readable.
Yet to argue the other side of it, because we go back and forth on this, the electronic copy is a perfect copy, and it is theoretically timeless. A book will degrade. You leave it out
Yes.
in the rain, it'll
Sure.
melt.
Mhm.
But a digital version of a work of intellectual property has at least the potential to travel through time effectively. So we time travelers, we creative time travelers, we say to ourselves, I'm going to hedge my bets. I'm going to try and write books that are in print and try and write books that are in digital form and audio form. I'm going to try to create physical works of art or text and hand them to people.
And the digital form actually can be literally transmitted through space into the universe somewhere.
Right.
Unlike a book, which you can't do that with unless you launch it on a rocket ship.
Just thinking about my career and this legacy that I was just talking about, without the internet, I don't have a career. Without the ability to transmit my ideas around the world, I'm not traveling around the world following my ideas into new opportunities.
For sure.
So in that sense, I would consider myself to be fortunate, but I would say what really set me free was the delete key.
So better than whiteout, isn't it?
It's so much better than whiteout, but on a soul level, the understanding that if you write something and you don't like it, you can make it go away effortlessly and painlessly. That was a breakthrough because I grew up as a writer, writing by hand, writing on typewriters, first manual typewriters, electric typewriters. And it's just a tremendous pain in the ass to go back and do it over again.
Tremendous pain in the ass.
Yeah.
I've told many people this, if you told me today you would continue on, I could continue on as a writer, but I'd have to finish off my career on a manual typewriter. I would say, I'm not doing any of that anymore. It's just too painful to do.
Yep.
And the computer makes all the difference in the world.
And your resolve would last about a week. And then you say, screw it.
I got to write
I just won't correct the typos. I won't care.
Exactly. I've been having a fantastic, lively conversation with John Vorhaus on this episode of StoryBeat, and we're about an hour's worth into the show, and we're gonna wind this down a little bit. And I'm just wondering, in all of your experiences throughout your career, do you have a story that you can share with us that's either weird, quirky, strange, or just perhaps plain funny?
I will tell you the story that I regularly dine out on. This is a classic of my repertoire, and it's timely because it involves our friends, the Russians. The year was 2008, and I was in Russia, in Moscow, running the adaptation of Bewitched. They had found their way to the American program Bewitched, and they were adapting it for Russian television. Right. Not a huge challenge. I was working for Sony at the time. It was a Sony property, and they were they basically set up this model where you take the scripts, the original American scripts, have some Russian translator translate them into Russian. Then the writers will read the scripts and reverse engineer the script into a story outline for the characters in their version of the show. This is the way adaptation works in broad strokes. And usually it works pretty well because even though there are cultural differences, you can overcome them. To take an example, in Married with Children, our Al Bundy plays football, American gridiron, but in the Russian version, he plays football, soccer. And this is how you make cultural transformation. But here's the problem. My writers came to me one day and they said, we're not doing this episode of Bewitched. And I said, why aren't you doing it? And they said, it's too dirty. It's obscene, and it will never be allowed on Russian television. I said to myself, that doesn't sound like the Bewitched I know. You remember Bewitched, the witch who goes with her nose and you go pinky, pinky, pink, and turns her husband into a frog or whatever. It's family entertainment of the 1960s in America. How could it possibly be too obscene? I said, it's not obscene. Just write the outline, do the development. It'll be fine. They said, nope, we're not going to do it unless we have network approval because it's obscene. Now, you and I have talked in this hour about the psychological state of a working writer. And my experience of the Russian writers is they didn't have a lot of incentive to work hard. They weren't very well paid and they weren't rewarded for initiative. That's just the Russian system. So part of my thinking was they just don't want to do it. There's something hard and it's too hard to do. So they're just being lazy about it. And they're trying to tell me that the problem can't be solved, I think. But how am I going to know unless I find out? Now, I don't read Russian, but my interpreter does.
Mhm.
So I handed her the script, the original translated Russian script. I said, read the script and tell me if there's any merit to what these guys are saying. And she read it. She reported back to me that, yeah, and they might have a case. Because here's the thing. The episode in question, a sexy single woman moves in next door to Darren and Samantha. Samantha, the witch, and Darren, the husband. And Darren, the husband, is hot for the sexy neighbor, and Samantha's jealous. That's the story. In the American version, that character's name is Pleasure O'Reilly, which is a fun little saucy, it's not exactly naughty. I mean, the fact that the woman's name is Pleasure might tell you something about it. It's certainly not obscene. It's not a dirty joke. But the Russian translator who first got a hold of it concluded that the only way to translate this character name was into the Russian phrase oral pleasure. So that literally every time the character's name gets mentioned, it's a blowjob joke.
Oh my goodness.
I said to these guys, look, all we got to do is change the character's name. Don't worry about the blowjobs. I grew up in America in the 60s. I know for a fact the blowjob wasn't introduced in America until 1973 when Linda Lovelace showed us what it was. That's not what this is. Do the episode. But that's the famous story of Pleasure O'Reilly and the Russian translation. And you can see this is the blessing of my career, that I've gotten to go all around the world collecting these fascinating tidbits and then weave them into my own understanding of myself and the world and my writing and my teaching. And so,
and you've had some amazing experiences just traveling.
Yes. Mm-hmm. I am the function of my gifts. Very clearly.
That is
very clearly.
I would call that a lucky life for sure.
I would call it too, but by design, in the sense that I made trade-offs. For example, I don't have children because I decided early on that I was going to move directly from my rested adolescence straight into my second childhood, and I just didn't want to go down that parenthood road. But it bought me a freedom to live a different kind of life. Sure. And no life is lived without regret, and everyone is aware of the road not taken. But I don't dwell in regret. I'm certainly happy with the life that I have and the life that I've constructed. And I'm especially happy that I continue to seek to make it more, to improve my self-understanding and especially improve my self-acceptance. Because I think that that's a human's job. A thinking human has a responsibility to get to the bottom of his or her own existence as the job of a life. I don't necessarily believe in reincarnation, but if I did, I would say that's where it lives. If you figure out what you need to figure out in this life, then you get to fly up into the next life like a off-Broadway show, finally getting a Broadway run.
Yeah, that's really wise. I think that you're looking at life as a journey of something to what you're trying to achieve in life. And it's not necessarily something that you have to try for, but you have to pay attention to for sure. Last question for you today, John. You've given us just an enormous amount of advice already, but I'm wondering if you have a single solid piece of advice or a tip for those that may be starting out and trying to get into the business, or maybe somebody's in a little bit trying to get to the next level.
My bedrock advice for all writers is so self-evident, but so hard to achieve. If you want to write better, write more. If you want to write a lot better, write a lot more. The growth that exists for you in your writing career exists on the page and nowhere else. Yes, you need to make contacts. Yes, you need to ship stuff out. Yes, you need to find an uncle in the business, get lucky breaks, enter contests, move to Los Angeles. But none of it stands in front of words on the page. And if you don't have a strong commitment to the daily active practice of writing, just writing, not even writing well, just writing, you're going to face an uphill climb, because to be the kind of writer who can have a sustainable career as a writer requires an apprenticeship. You need to spend a lot of years being a kind of writer who isn't good enough to sell, who hasn't evolved to the point where their writing can speak to other people in the right way. Take the long view, take pleasure in the process, try not to worry too much about the success or failures of other people. Don't measure yourself against other people. Recognize that your path is your path and your practice is your practice. And as long as you are on your path and in your practice, you're where you need to be.
That is just very phenomenal advice. And I'm glad that you said it, because I tell people all the time, you want to be a writer, you got to write. There's no substitute for it. You can't go down to the store and buy your way into being a writer. You have to write.
Mm-hmm.
John Vorhaus, this has been a spectacular hour plus on StoryBeat today. And I can't thank you enough for spending a little time and your wisdom with us today, and just great stuff. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
And so we've come to the end of today's StoryBeat. If you like this episode, won't you please take a moment to give us a comment, rating, or review on whatever app or platform you're listening to. Your support helps us bring more great StoryBeat episodes to you. StoryBeat is available on all major podcast apps and platforms, including Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, TuneIn, and many others. Until next time, I'm Steve Cuden, and may all your stories be unforgettable.